So the thing about this menstrual pad kit is if you do each thing precisely, if you do it very carefully, pay attention to all your notches, your seam width, everything, you will end up with a beautiful product. If you skimp on any of those steps, you'll end up with a nightmare and you'll have to take it all out and start over again. So it really is worth it to be very careful and exact throughout the whole process. So this is the pattern for the carrier, the part that actually holds the pad in place. And when you go to cut this, you'll notice that there's like a V shape here when you put these two pieces together. There should be. Don't try to straighten that out. Keep that as a V shape. The reason for that is we want the end of our carrier to be narrower than down here, so that when we fold it over, we get a nice clean line. And later on in the video, you'll see when I sew that, how that's going to work. So make sure that when you're cutting these, you're going to get this little piece here. It looks sort of like an eye, and these pieces will line up, but then they don't line up. Then there's this little V shape that you're going to cut out every time. You're going to draw around your pattern with the tailored chalk. There is a notch here, and there's a notch here, and here, and that's all those notches are for lining things up to make sure everything's in place. Okay, now we're going to make the carrier, the part of the kit that holds the actual pad. So I'm going to start with the strap. The strap is a rectangle. We're going to fold it lengthwise. Do a small seam, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, no more than that. And start again to backtack. Backtack at the end. Okay, we're going to turn this. I just have a little piece of PVC piping. I'm going to stick it in here. This is why you want to make sure your seam isn't too deep. If it is, you can't get the pipe in there. So you're going to put it through until about there. And take a chopstick. I always use the blunt end of the chopstick. And you're going to push that in there. Whoops. And let this come out the other end. And it's turned. All right, we'll iron that in a minute when we iron everything else. And we'll take a piece of the carrier, one side, and on the back of it, the back side of it, we're going to put a piece of Tyvek. So here's a notch, there's a notch, and you've got notches on your Tyvek. So we're going to line those up here and there. Basically what you're doing here is you are just basting this on. So you want to keep very close to the edge. Let it lay nice and flat. And don't pull on your fabric, just let it lay there. I'm going to go all the way around it, and it's really important to keep to the edge of this because you're going to use that stitching line as a guide later on in the sewing process. need to back tack because again, we're just holding it in place. Get rid of all your threads. And that's what that looks like. Then the strap has a seam. Instead of putting the seam on the edge, I put it in the back. So it's totally out of sight. Like that. You see the seam running down there. And then I just press that. See, so it's nice and neat on this side. Then you fold it in half. And cut it. Now you have two straps. There's a stitch from your Tyvek across here and across that end. And what you do is you put these straps with the seam down an inch from that stitching and straight across. So you really want to make sure that you have equal distance from here to there. If you feel like you can't do that by eye, use your measuring tape. So I've got those in place, and again, I'm going to stitch right on the edge because all we're doing is basting these in place. Now I'll put the other one down here. And then I'm going to baste them on the other side. Again, make sure they're nice and straight. Now the straps are on. Under this is a notch. Is that the notch? Yeah. There's a notch here. It's a really small notch, but it's there. And there's a notch there. So you want to put the notch ends together. If you don't do that, let me show you what will happen. If you do it the other way around, see, it doesn't match up because you have a front and a back to this pad. So you have to make sure that your notched edges are together. It's my notch. There's a notch. So then it will line up beautifully. I start with the unnotched end. And I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to start by back tacking. I want to keep my edges really nicely together. If the cutting is really nicely done, it works beautifully. If you don't do your cutting carefully, then you fight with the whole thing. But you want to make sure at this end, sometimes the notches get cut a little big. You want to make sure that you get that notch in your seam. Otherwise, you're going to have a hole there when you turn out. So these notches are really little, so I'm not going to have any trouble. But sometimes you just have to pay attention to that. Hold your edges together. And you want to back tack. Okay, this is the most important part of the whole thing, is right now. So I've sewn this thing. It looks great on the side that I sewed it on, but you have to turn it around. And you have to check to make sure that you got everything. Now, I would say here that my stitching is too close to the edge. So I'm going to go back in there, and I'm just going to make it a little bit deeper, because if a girl is wearing this and, you know, there's too much activity, she can pull that seam right out. So I don't want that to happen. So I'm gonna back tack there a little bit, and just go in a little bit, not much, but just enough to make sure that this is going to be stable. So now I've got it so that everything looks like it's all secure. All right, and I make sure that my notch is within the seam up here. It is. Okay. So now the next step for this, cut the corners a little bit on the finished edge, just a little, just so it's not as bulky in there. All right. Now you start on the end that's closed. Push it down a little bit. You're going to turn it. And you can do this with just a regular yardstick, piece of wood, you know, whatever, dowel. The part where it's a little hard to turn is where the Tyvek is, so just be gentle. There you go. Now, what's happening here, I'm glad this happened so that I can explain it. There's this stitching of your strap on the outside. Remember, that's supposed to go down? That just means when I put the yardstick through here, I got it on the wrong side of the strap. So all you need to do is turn them to the other side. And then they're the right way. You want to pull everything out nice and carefully. Now, I often use a knitting needle, but you can also use a straight pin to get your corners. See, I don't like that. That looks ugly to me. I want it to be nice and as much of a nice sharp corner as you can get. But be careful with the knitting needle because it can go right straight through. So just be gentle. That's way better. So now we'll go over to the iron. Now, if you don't have an iron, you just have to work on these edges so that you pull them right out to these seams right out to the edge. And sometimes if there's no electricity and people have no way of actually ironing, you can take that and run it along the side of a table. But you have to really pull them out first, and you can do that. But because we happen to have an iron, we're going to use it. So you want to get those edges. See, I've got them right on the edge there. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And pulled out. Nice and flat. And when you come to the Tyvek is strange. It's from here to here, right? And so, and there's all different qualities of it. And sometimes we get some that it can start to melt. So you don't want to put your iron on there for very long. Just a little bit, just enough to make it look nice and neat. And then you can go back to really putting heat on the fabric. I'm using a cotton setting on the iron, and as long as you're using, fabric that's 100% cotton, that's a great setting. If you happen to be using something that has some polyester in it, try your fabric first before you set your iron that hot. Okay. We'll go back to the sewing machine. So what we're going to do is fold this back 4 inches. And you can make a template for yourself if you want, or tape measure. So that's 4 inches. And you'll see that this end here is a little narrower than the body of the strap of the carrier. And that's on purpose. We want that to be like that. All right, so we're going to start with the lower side, the bottom. And I like the stitch to be right on the edge. Come on, fabric. You definitely want a back tack. And keep that stitch right on the edge. There you go, like that. And see, when you look on the back, on the other side of it, you can't see anything sticking out. Sometimes what happens, and I really don't like it when this happens, is that if that part is too wide, after you stitch it, what you'll see on this side is the side sticking out. And that just looks sloppy to me. I want it to look nice and neat. I had a friend once say to me that every carrier should look like a piece of art. And I thought, yeah, because we want to be respectful of these girls and give them something that's really beautiful. So there's the 4 inches. Now every 1 inch, we're going to stitch across this piece. And if you feel like you've got to mark it, please go ahead and mark it. If you feel like you can do this and eyeball it, that's great. Make sure you back tack. So we're going to put 4 channels or casings, however you want to call them, in here. That's my next inch. 4 channels. And that's what makes this one size fits all, because you can use whichever one you need with your belt, and we don't need to make all sorts of different sizes. So on the other side, that side's open because we had to have a way to turn the whole thing. So you need to fold that in 1/4 of an inch. And I really mean 1/4 of an inch. I have people again who do that. No, you want just 1/4 of an inch, just a little bit. And all these things, there's a reason for them. I mean, it has to do with the size of the carrier. So if you start taking 1/2 an inch where we've said 1/4 of an inch, the whole sizing is going to be off. So again, we want to fold back 4 inches. So there's my 4 inches there. And we'll start with the lower part. The side is a little trickier because you've got that folded in. If you want to press that first, that's okay too. Right on the edge. Sewing machine. I don't like that. See that? I don't like it. The machine pushed it, so I'm going to take that out. And I'd rather take it out now than after the whole thing's done, and then I have to take a lot out. So you just keep your eye on what is going on. Then you can correct problems before they become huge problems. Okay. All right, I'm going to back tack. Stay right on the edge. Then we're going to put in our 4 channels. Lost my thread. Done. Clean it off. There we go. Nice and neat. Okay, now we're going to put the elastic on the shoelace that we use as the waist strap, the belt. Fold the shoelace in half. Mark the center. mark 6 inches on either side of that center. So there we are there. And there. Okay. And we're going to stitch a piece of elastic there. So we'll start right on that end, where that mark is. And in order for the elastic to stay on, we've got to back tack. I want to really get that nice and secure, a few times maybe. All right, now once you get that in place, then you start stretching this. You stretch it as much as you can and start to stitch. Keep it stretched. My thread. So when I start this up again, I'm just going to put a little extra stitch, a little back tacking right where I lost my thread, so that I make sure that that part right there is going to stay strong. And I'm going to start stretching again. And there's my other mark. So I'm just going to go down to there. All right, when I see that chalk line, then I will start to back tack a few times. Okay, there we go. Get rid of all these threads. You can just turn it around and around, twist it. I'm going to cut the elastic off at the other end. There we go. Bit of elastic on the belt. Here's the fabric. We're going to lay it on here. We want to get it straight so that it's parallel to the edge of the fabric, so that it's a nice straight grain. And then we're going to use tailor's chalk to mark around it. And as we mark it, we're going to mark these little notches here. See, we're going to go all the way around the whole thing. And you have to keep the pattern right where it's supposed to be, right in the same spot the whole time, so that all your notches will be exactly where they need to be when you cut them. And you'll see later that those notches make it possible to sew this drawstring bag and get it all to line up beautifully. So then we're going to cut it. Well, there's my notch, and I'm just going to cut in no more than 1/4 of an inch, just a tiny little bit. I don't know if you can see that. We don't want you to cut, you know, like this. You want it just to be tiny, tiny, just a little bit, just enough so that the sewer can follow that notch. And then everything else gets cut out very carefully, right on the line. The more exact it is, the easier it is to put this thing together and to get a really nice looking bag. We need all 4 of those notches. This notch in. If you keep your scissors on the table instead of up in the air, you'll get a much more exact cut. So this side I haven't put the notches in yet, but I'm going to. 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. So that when I go to sew this, see my notch here and my notch there? They're perfect. They're exactly where they should be. So when I go to sew it, I know right where I'm going to start stitching. So that's the drawstring bag. So in this drawstring bag, there's notches that are cut on all 4 edges here, the ends. All right, so this is what we do. You set up your notches here. You make them so that they, all right, so what we're doing is we're putting our notches together. See our notches, they're lined up perfectly. And we'll do a 1/2 inch seam here, starting at that notch. And then when we start to sew, we're going to back tack to make it nice and firm. And then sew to the end of the seam. And we're again going to back tack. Trim all our stitching to keep everything nice and neat. Okay, so we've got our notches. Some of the problems with doing this is that we have all sorts of different people cutting these. All right, lining up my notches, back tacking. Back tacking again. You want everything to stay nice and firm so it doesn't fall apart. We say that this whole kit will last you from 3 to 5 years if you treat it carefully. But if it's not sewn well, it's also going to fall apart. So you have to make sure to back tack and to be really careful with the stitching. So here's where I've stitched it up to that notch. I'm going to fold this back with my finger, just make those sides the same. So that's the same as your seam allowance. I'll put it back in here and stitch right on the edge. What I do is I stitch right into the seam here. And raise my foot, pivot it around, lower my foot again, see, so you get that nice and neat. Do the same thing on the other side. this part you don't have to back tack because you're going to fold the top down, so you don't need to worry about that stitch up here. They're going to fold the top over 1/4 of an inch. Let me do this side, sorry. Like that. And then again, right to where that notch is. So here's something that people do often. They don't do 1/4 of an inch, they go like that. And then they fold it over again. And what happens is if you don't leave that opening as big as it's supposed to be, it's hard to get the drawstring through. So 1/4 of an inch there, and then down to this. So you're leaving a nice wide casing. And you stitch right on the edge. Come on, sewing machine. And you want to back tack. And keep it all nice and even so that your casing is the same all the way across. If you feel like it's hard to do, then use an iron and iron it and use a ruler. Back tack. I like to just continue here, but you can actually take it out from underneath your foot if you want to. Back tack. Clean up all the threads and turn the whole thing. I use a knitting needle to just gently pull the corners out so it's nice and neat. Now we want to put the drawstrings in. So you're going to go from one side through with this loop turner. There's a little hook on the end, so you hook it here. And you have to hook up far enough. If you hook way down towards the bottom, all the threads will just come unwoven and it won't hold. Alright, and then you just pull that through. And then you go into the other side. Oh, I lost it. That'll happen. So you have to just try to grab it again. Come on. Okay. Then you want to tie a knot on the end. And that knot needs to be as close to the end as you can get it. And the reason for that is you want to be able to open this bag as far as possible. If you tie the knot in here, then you're not going to be able to open it. It's going to be hard to get your hand in there to get the pad out. So you want that as close as you can. Then you go to the side that doesn't have the knot. And you put your turner in there. Pull it through. Tie that knot, again, as close to the end as you can get it. So there, now it opens really far. And you pull the two sides, and there's your drawstring bag. Just like that. Right, this is the ripstop nylon, and it's just a rectangle. So you're going to cut it the same way you do the drawstring bag by tracing around it with the tailor's chalk and cutting carefully, but there are no notches in it, so this part is a little easier to cut. What I do is I just fold it over and I make, again with my fingernail, I just kind of go like that so that I know that that's the middle. And then I measure down 3 1/4 inches and I put this piece of Velcro right there. Now if you want, you can actually take a pen and put a little mark there so you know that it's exactly where it's supposed to be. The thing about doing it this way is it's so much easier than trying to put it on afterwards. So you're going to stitch. This stuff is not that easy either. And you might want to do a little back stitch. You do want to do a little back stitch, otherwise this thing will come off. Put your needle down, pivot, stitch. So you're going all the way around the whole thing. Stitch. There you go. Okay, now your right sides together. Back stitch. And a little tension on the seam to keep it from puckering. What happens is your foot doesn't slide on that rubberized part, so it's sometimes a little difficult. To the other side. Now we're going to turn the top over 1/4 inch and another 1/4 inch, so you have a nice clean hem up there. You want to stitch right on the edge. tack. Turn it. And you can do the same thing in this corner as you did in the others. You can use a knitting needle or a pin. So the other part of your Velcro, what you want to do is you want to make sure that it's going to line up with this one. So you fold the top over and you just find out where that's going to be. And sew that in place. You're going to do the same thing you did before. You're going to sew all the way around, back tacking at the beginning and the end. Now what happens is you've got that Velcro on there, you fold it once, and then you can fold it again. Now you've got a waterproof bag that when something's in there, it can't come out. So we're going to put the elastic belt, the shoelace with the elastic. I just pick whatever casing I feel in the mood for that day. It's just to hold it all together and give the girl an idea of how it all works, but she's going to have to find which casing works for her. But the little finished part at the end of the shoelace, the aglet, I think you call it, or anglet, helps it go through that channel. And then I'm going to take our pad and fold it twice. So I'm going to fold it once this way, and I'm folding it on the horizontal. See, there's the long end and a short end. I'm folding it from short end to short end, and then doing it again. So we're ending up with 4 layers there. And then that will slide underneath each of the straps. And there's the pad. And each one of these kits will get 3 of these. So then we're going to just make this look nice for the presentation for the girl. We're going to wrap that around here. And we'll take our drawstring bag and we'll put the carrier in there, the waterproof bag in there, and we'll put a little Mooncatcher care instruction into the bag. And there we go.